Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, a discussion with WKYT sportscasters Brian Milam and Dave Baker on the proposed rules changes for college basketball and the potential impact on Kentucky. That's coming up right here in just a few minutes. But first, candidate for Congress Reggie Thomas is here. Thomas represents a lot of Lexington in the state Senate now, and he is in the hunt for the Democratic nomination for Congress in the 6th District. During a League of Women Voters forum earlier this week in Lexington, Thomas staked out some positions to the left of Lexington Mayor Jim Gray and retired fighter pilot Amy McGrath. Those included stances on health care, medical marijuana, and gun control. Senator Thomas is also just coming out of the 2018 Kentucky legislative session where he was often at odds with the Republican majority on issues including public education. Senator Thomas joining us on Kentucky Newsmakers, and thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Bill, thank you for having me. It's good to see you again.
Well, you've been doing double duty here, running for Congress and serving in the legislature. What's the response you feel you're getting as you go out there and you know that you're up against much better funded candidates?
Well Bill, I'm getting a wonderful response, very warm, very receptive. But as I was telling you off the air, most of these counties I've been in for years. In fact, in several of them, Bill, they knew me before I was Senator Reggie. They just knew me as Reggie Thomas, someone who was concerned about the Democratic Party, wanted to build the Democratic Party, to strengthen it. So I have relationships in several of these counties going back 10, 15 years. So they've known me a long time. But yes, my reception has been very engaging, very warm, very friendly. And I've been in a lot of them many times. So I feel good about where I am, in those counties outside of Lexington.
So you felt in some cases you were renewing old acquaintances?
Oh, I definitely was.
Yeah.
Not I felt like it, I was renewing old acquaintances.
You talk about you've been in the process of trying to help rebuild the Democratic Party. Are you trying to separate yourself in this campaign for Congress as, let's say, a true Democratic candidate? I mean, as we pointed out, you took positions that were maybe to the left of a couple of the apparent front runners.
Well, Bill, I don't think that the positions I've taken are necessarily to the left. I think they're the right thing to do. I think when we talk about Medicare for all, single-payer health care system, most of your industrialized countries do it now. And in fact, we do it here in America. In fact, we do it in two different occasions. We have what was called a Children's Health Insurance Program for infants to 18. That's a single-payer health care system for those families who otherwise can't afford health care for children. And then we do it again for those 65 and over. We call that Medicare. Okay? And so we have a single-payer health care system. We have two here in America now. What we don't have is one for those 18 to 64. And that's the gap I want to close. And frankly, we've got to close it. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford health care in this country in a decade or so.
If we go to a single-payer option, do you propose that doctors stay in private practice, or would you want the country to move to a model where there's maybe little profit motive in health care, as you are saying that the cost continues to go up?
Well, let me be clear by your question. Doctors can still make a good living, a very good living, under the single-payer health care system. Now, I'm not advocating a clinic type of situation. That may occur. I'm certainly not opposed to that. But what my plan does more than anything else are two important things. One, it makes health care accessible to people. Right now, Bill, you have too many people that feel like they can't afford to go to a doctor. They just can't. They just don't have the resources, the income to do that. I think that's tragic. In addition, I want to make it accessible. I want to make health care available to all. You've got some counties, Bill, that don't even have obstetricians, gynecologists. I want to make it so that people can be able to go see a doctor when they get sick. And that's not a Republican concept. That's not a Democratic concept. That's just a moral way for people to live.
You have proposed medical marijuana in the state legislature and championed that. Do you support federal legislation on that issue?
Well, from a federal standpoint, I think we've got to do one thing. I think marijuana needs to be eliminated as a Schedule I drug. It makes no sense in 2018 for marijuana to be a 2018 drug. It's not like cocaine or some of those really hard, addictive, dangerous type drugs. Marijuana does have some well-recognized medical benefits, in the area of skin disease, in the area of glaucoma, providing cancer patients with some relief, which I think is really important to a lot of people. So it has medical benefits. 28 states, Bill, already do it, including the District of Columbia, and it's working well with them. And here's the really important point that I think gets lost in this whole discussion about medical marijuana. In those states that have it, what we've seen, this is evidence-based, what we've seen is a 30 to 50% reduction in opioid addiction. So it reduces opioid addiction in those states that have medical marijuana. We need to have it here in Kentucky.
The gun violence debate is vigorous in this country and here in Kentucky as well, and we had the school shooting out in Marshall County, certainly. In your Senate district, gunfire, often deadly, is all too frequent, as you know. The Second Amendment to the Constitution is clear about the right to bear arms. What changes do you want in that area?
Well, as I've always said when this issue comes up, I believe in the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was in existence before I became elected official. It will remain after I leave public office. With that said, though, we have to recognize that we have a gun access problem in our country and in this state. And far too many people are able to get guns within 30 minutes that don't have guns. We've got to do something. And the question you asked me the other night, you talked about Marshall County. You talked about Parkland. I pointed out that we had just seen that day something occur in Memphis. We see these tragedies played out too frequently on the American landscape. And I propose three things. They're just these are common sense solutions. They're not taking away anybody's guns. One, let's have a waiting period of longer than 30 minutes. I propose 3 days, but that's a starting point for a conversation. But you have to have a waiting period to make sure that we keep guns out of the hands of people who have some kind of violent history or mental health history. We got to do that. Secondly, there is no need for military-style weapons on the public domain. Those weapons are designed for battlefields of war, and that's where they belong. They don't belong in our schools, our churches, our concerts. And then thirdly, let's get rid of those items like bump stocks that really change the nature of a gun, from a semi-automatic weapon to automatic weapon. Those are common sense ideas that don't take away anybody's guns, but just make our society safer.
And you stop there with your restrictions?
Well, those are three. I mean, I think those are common sense approaches.
As you travel this district, which is made up of the larger city of Lexington and the thriving and growing smaller cities like Richmond and Nicholasville and Georgetown and Winchester, some of those areas, and then the farming areas around those.
That's right.
What skills would you bring, Senator, to the congressional office, the congressional seat, that would make you effective in representing those somewhat disparate areas within the same district?
Unlike a lot of elected officials, I'm running on my record. I'm actually running on what I've done and what I've accomplished in the legislative process. I've been in the trenches. I've been in that environment where you have people who are hard Republicans and hard Democrats and are really bonded by that party identification. And what I've been able to do in the 5 sessions I've been there is to navigate that successfully, to help people, to bring benefits to Central Kentucky. Okay? And I'm going to take that same kind of mindset and skill set where I've been successful over the last 5 years to Washington and navigate that environment, which is even more difficult than Frankfurt, to the success of the people here in Central Kentucky.
How do you compete against bigger moneyed candidates? You have candidates Gray and McGrath, both with $1 million war chests and running very frequent advertising and able to put signs everywhere. Isn't that a very uphill battle for you?
Well, Look, first of all, I'm still raising money. I want to say that. I'm still raising money, and it's still coming in daily, and in good numbers. So it's not like I'm not raising money. Would I like to raise more money? Of course. But I'm raising money for my campaign. And people, when I call them up, they still say, yes, Reggie, we believe in you. So the money's still coming in. I want to get that clear. The other thing is that people do know me. Look, I've been around the counties, but I've been a fixture in Lexington now for well over 35 years. And I've been engaged in this community. It's not like I've been sitting on the sidelines. I've been actively doing things in Lexington to, again, help grow this community, like building new high schools, for example. It's just one example of what I've done. So, people know me, and they know what kind of person I am. And they know that I'm a man of my word. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. If I say we're going to work together to get something done, they know I'm going to be shoulder to shoulder with them to make sure it gets done. And so I'm taking the same approach, the same kind of person I've always been, that same kind of character, to this congressional race. I think I'll be successful with it, Bill.
We are with Senator Reggie Thomas, a candidate for Congress in the Democratic primary coming up on May 22nd. A couple of questions about the legislative session that's just ended. We'll ask him those, and then a little bit later on we're going to talk about the proposed rules changes for college basketball, and that's coming up later on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back into WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We continue our discussion with Senator Reggie Thomas, Democrat of Lexington and candidate for Congress this year. You're just coming out of the legislative session, and I know some of that was frustrating to you. The minority Democrats could be loud, but you can seldom pass or block anything from happening over there. But you fought, I know, on the pension bill and in higher education, some other issues. How do you think the session went?
It didn't go well for what I think is important, particularly with regard to public education. And you're absolutely right. I fought tooth and nail to protect public education and protect our teachers. I think this pension bill is designed really to just put public education in a very detrimental position. No one's going to want to go teach in the school when they don't have any retirement security, when they're not getting paid what they might make in the private sector. And that's what this pension bill does. There are two things people need to understand. This pension bill was designed, one, to get rid of the inviolable contract, to make sure these teachers had no retirement security. I call it a piggy bank retirement. You put your pennies in, and then 30 years later you get your pennies out. That's what we have for our teachers going forward, our new teachers, a piggy bank retirement, okay? And then secondly, on top of that, we really still don't fund education. People talk about the SEEK formula being funded at historic levels, but there's no money for professional development to become a better teacher, Bill. There's not enough money for transportation to get the kids to school. There's no money, Bill, for textbooks to give them the resource and materials to learn. So K-12 education still has a long way to go.
Some of that was softened by some of the money that was gotten in the final budget that passed. So there was a revenue bill that raised some money. Would you have been for raising more revenue to address these problems?
In this budget bill, and this is why I posted, we just really dipped our toe in terms of tax reform. I've been an advocate for tax reform and remain a strong advocate for tax reform, but it's got to be meaningful and it's got to be long term. And this budget doesn't even do that. And my biggest objection, which I made on the Senate floor, and I will continue to make this, is that Kentucky now, going on 12 years, going on a dozen years, is the only state in this country that has reduced higher education appropriations consistently. We have said to the nation now, we don't care about higher education. And I think that is a recipe for disaster in terms of attracting industry and technology and innovation in this state.
Do you think, we're down to just about a minute, one of your concerns in that area is as well that reduces the receipts to state government, because that is where typically the higher wages come from, are those who have gotten a college education.
You said it very well. I mean, I can't say it any better than what you said. Those people who are higher wage earners are not going to come here because they see no future in this state.
What do you do the next couple of weeks here before this primary?
I'm leaving here and going out to campaign some more, and we'll continue to do that up until May 22nd.
Knocking on those doors.
and doing a lot more than that.
All right. Senator, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. Senator
thank you for having me.
Reggie Thomas, candidate for Congress. All right, coming next, a discussion with WKYT's Brian Milam and Dave Baker about the proposed rules changes in college basketball. Interesting discussion. It's ahead on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Some major changes are proposed for college basketball. One recommendation from a group working to reform the rules says the NCAA should end the one-and-done era and more harshly punish coaches and programs that cheat. Former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice led the commission on college basketball. What could those proposed changes mean for Kentucky Wildcat teams going forward? Brian Milam and Dave Baker need no introduction. They're sports anchors here at WKYT with years of experience. And gentlemen, thanks for coming in. Give us some perspective on this, guys. How did this tough set of recommendations come about?
Well, everything started to really hit when this FBI probe began. And that's when Mark Emmert said, we need to fix what's wrong with college basketball. The FBI probe, the pay for play, the Louisville situation certainly has exploded, and it's still a long way from over. And this commission is supposed to come up with recommendations. My problem with what happened earlier was what did they really accomplish? You know, the first thing that came out of Condoleezza Rice's mouth when it came to the recommendations, it seemed like everything was the one and done rule. That's where all of this lies, apparently, with the commission.
Dave, your thoughts on that? The one and done, is that the most important component that was brought out in this?
I don't know if it is. I think obviously it doesn't make any difference whether it's college basketball or whether you got guys that are trying to get an edge in NASCAR. I mean, as long as there's big money involved, there are people that are going to try to get an edge. Brian, from his baseball background, knows it, and that's the reason we went through all of that during the steroid era. But here's the thing. I mean, there is a lot of money in college basketball. The NBA and the NCAA have they've got two different things that they're trying to accomplish, and most people doesn't realize that what the NCAA wants to do is they want to educate and they want their game to grow. They want to give an opportunity for these kids, and yes, it's big money. But the NBA wants to get all those best players in the NBA just as quickly as they can. So they can say they're all about college athletics and everything, but actually they're competing against one another.
So these recommendations are not binding on anybody, right? But it's a best practices recommendation?
Well, what Condoleezza Rice was saying about the one and dones, well, the NBA needs to do this. The NBA Players Association needs to do this. The NCAA is helpless with one and done. They have nothing. They can do nothing with one and done because it's all set by the NBA. And then Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, sits there and goes, well, we'll talk about that when we are ready because it's up to them to change the rule. This commission cannot change the one and done rule.
But let me say this. I think one thing they can do is they've kind of put the onus on them now.
Oh, sure. They've made it all them.
Because if there is a kid now, because the way the rule reads now, Bill, is that you can you have to be either 19 years of age or a year removed from high school in order to go to the NBA. So what the proposal for Condoleezza Rice's group is now is that they're going to lobby the NBA and the NBA Players Association to say, if you're 18 and you're right out of high school, you can come. So now, if you get somebody extremely talented, like a LeBron James, like a Kobe Bryant or somebody, and they want to pursue their professional career, it's not the NCAA telling them they can't do that anymore. It's the NBA itself.
Would that take some of the dazzle out of college basketball if the very best players went straight to the NBA?
I don't think so. I think it would make it more balanced because we have all said when talking about Kentucky a couple of years ago, when the old system, what we grew up with was Patrick Ewing stayed for 3 years and Ralph Sampson stayed. Could you imagine what Kentucky would have been like had they had Karl Anthony Towns and Tyler Ulis and all of these guys together over the last 4 years and a De'Aaron Fox? My gosh, they just mail home the trophy. But it would do that for a lot of colleges and universities. I believe it would balance the power. Kentucky is going to be good. College basketball is going to be good no matter what you do.
A couple things to remember, too, though, Bill. There's only a fraction of the players. As great as all these players are, there's only a fraction that can go straight from high school to the NBA. And in history, there's only been a fraction. The other thing, too, is that if the NBA adopts this, it won't eliminate the one and done. It'll eliminate the requirement that you have to play in college for a year and then go. But there will still be guys that choose to come for a year and then after a year might choose to try their hand at the pros.
All right, let's bring it home, talk about the potential impact on Kentucky. Coach Cal has said basically he's been playing by the rules as written. And here lately has indicated, in fact, he is somewhat of an advocate of ending the one and done.
I think he said, I will do whatever the rules say I can do, and that's exactly what he's done. It's amazing how when John Calipari set the standard for this one-and-done recruiting, oh my gosh, he's revolutionized college basketball. Mike Krzyzewski over the last couple of years has adopted the same philosophy. And what a genius Mike Krzyzewski is. It's not going to hurt Kentucky. Cal, you want to bring in, I'm still going to get the best guys. They may be here a year, they may be 2 years, and then I get the next best group and the next best group. It's not going to hurt college at all, I don't think.
For people that tried to say this was all Cal's folks and all his doing, it's like the way you bucked up against cell phones and computers in the early days and claimed that they would never work. I mean, he was just doing what was available, and now when you get a guy like Mike Krzyzewski, as Brian said, comes along, okay, all right, fine.
Well, would recruiting potentially be less rigorous if you don't have to restock?
No.
No?
I don't think so, because there's a lot of high school kids that say, hey, Kobe Bryant did it, and old school guys say, well, Moses Malone jumped from high school to the pros. I can do it too. They're not going to get paid a lot of money, though, in the G League if they go. People have talked about $30,000 a year for a G League player. Well, let's talk about the taxes and the agents and all the stuff that you have to pay. You're only going to get a portion of that.
But Brian, because of his playing background over at Morehead State and everything he does for us with UK baseball, he's more familiar with this than I. But I mean, baseball coaches deal with this every year. You can go out and sign a great kid, and then you've got to basically re-recruit him against what he could potentially make if he goes right out of high school to sign a professional contract.
The baseball recruiting rule, the baseball eligibility rule, if you do not sign out of high school with a pro team, you have to go to college and stay 3 years. I've known guys that have been drafted 3 times out of high school, after their junior year, after their senior year. They've been drafted 3 times. There's been talk that if the NBA, the NBA Players Association, doesn't help the NCAA, Condoleezza Rice said, it's possible we could make freshmen ineligible, like they did years and years ago.
What about these other proposals from Condoleezza's group about the harsher penalties for coaches for programs that break the rules? That was another example.
I'm a black and white guy. Yeah, there should be harsher penalties. Yeah, well, we've got harsh penalties. There are harsh financial stipulations. Hey, if you do this, you're going to lose this. Why don't we just hear Condoleezza Rice and this commission say, look, if you do this, you're going to get a 5-year suspension. Let's put it in writing, and let's just quit talking about what we know what needs to be done. Give us something we can sink our teeth into.
I think the best thing she did, though, was talked about getting people from the outside involved with the NCAA. Because what's happened is this has been a group of member schools basically governing and disciplining themselves. It would be like the NFL owners disciplining themselves. Yeah, but they've got Roger Goodell to be the bad guy. And so what she said is all the different boards she's been on nationally and internationally, they have people from outside the organization. And the reason this was started in the first place was because Mark Emmert and the NCAA had been hammered so badly, and rightfully so by the public, for their mishandling of so many cases, including the North Carolina case, which was mentioned, where they let them off of academic fraud because they said it just wasn't an impermissible benefit for the student athletes, but regular students could get it as well.
There was a lawsuit filed by the University of Louisville and its foundation this week that is against the former president, James Ramsey. They're trying to get back money that they say.
And a number of people in his administration.
What sports implications could that have?
Well, it could have a lot because you know, basketball obviously has been hammered. Louisville basketball has just been decimated with its public image. And how long is it going to take to get that back? Who knows? Because obviously you win with the best players normally. And I think it's going to hurt Louisville if they can't get some of this money back. I mean, what has happened at U of L over the last 5 years, 6 years has been devastating to them. How much can they get back? I don't know.
Well, and that's the question. How much can you get back? I mean, obviously their university is, as their new athletics director said, you know, they've got plenty of money, but it's not just falling out of trees. I mean, if you look at that whole, I think that lawsuit was about 60 some odd pages or something like that. If you look at that, I mean, it talks about the systematic ways that these individuals allegedly went to get that money out and to take care of themselves is the allegation, and they went to great lengths to hide that. That's money that was intended for other uses. The other thing I think that'll be more long-term, Bill, is they were using a lot of that money for athletic facilities and athletic salaries. And that was because James Ramsey was the head of the university, the head of the athletics, and the head of the foundation. And so really all that just kind of funneled through them. Will the university be able to do what they have in terms of salaries and facilities for their sports moving forward now that that apparatus isn't available?
All right, it'll be interesting to watch. And finally, Rob Bromley was up at the Cincinnati Reds game this week, the legend of our WKYT sports staff, and he got to throw out the first pitch. Wasn't that something to see?
Reached back for a little extra on that 42-mile-an-hour fastball, and his son Robbie was the guy behind the plate, made a nice little glove save off the plate, and Rob said, "Hey, I'm 67. Cut me some slack." You know, so.
Guys, I know you're busy. Appreciate your time. Thanks for coming by Kentucky Newsmakers. And that is Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT. Thank you for joining us. We'll have the latest for you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning. We start at 4:30. Have a good week ahead.